Hello. So I wanted today to just share a sliver about the mindfulness of feeling. This is one of the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And I read something recently that I thought would express very succinctly and maybe a little more extensively some things that are words that work well for my own experience in working with this practice. And I was thinking about this when I was thinking about working with physical pain, the unpleasant feeling. So feeling, remember, is pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral. We have both mental and physical feelings. So rather than talk about my own experience, I wanted to talk more about something that Bhikkhu Analayo said in a book of his. It's called Mindfully Facing Disease and Death. And he mentions something that really expresses my experience of this. And he says, by approaching with mindful understanding the experience of feelings in general and pain in particular, this experience becomes a powerful source of insight. And then he says, all it takes is to remain aware in the present moment of the changing process of feelings as it is without reacting. And this, I think, encapsulates my experience. But one thing that I want to be clear on, and this is what I want to talk about, is when he says all it takes is to remain aware in the present moment of the changing process of feelings as it is without reacting, he's not talking about bare attention. And that's one thing that we often will see, and people will think about this. And it's some people would sometimes when they describe mindfulness, they'll use this expression, bare attention, and others. And this, in a Buddhist context, I think is not really accurate. Not that there isn't a little bit of that, but it's not the bulk of it. Rather, if what he said in the sentence before was approaching with mindful understanding the experience of feelings. So there's a book that I read 2 articles in that I found really interesting, and the book is called Mindfulness, Diverse Perspectives on Its Meaning, Origin, and Application. And one of the editors is John Kabat-Zinn, who we know from the field of psychology and pain management. And the other editor I don't know is J. Mark G. Williams. But in there's an article by Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's a Theravada master, I would say, and also George Dreyfus, who's a Tibetan scholar, but also was the first Westerner who got a Geshe degree, and was a monk for a while then, obviously. And they both discuss this in different ways. For Bhikkhu Bodhi, he rejects the notion of bare attention in mindfulness meditation. And in my words, I would say it kind of boils down to, he says, at best, in a Buddhist context, this may be used as a learning tool for folks that are new to the practice. That's how I would kind of summarize what he's saying. What he actually talks about is that it was actually his teacher, Nyana Ponika, who coined the phrase bare attention. And he wasn't using it as a translation for sati, which is what is usually, that's what they both use, the word mindfulness for sati. But sati also means memory. And sometimes Bhikkhu Bodhi likes the translation, he'll translate it lucid awareness. So lucid awareness versus bare attention is a bit of a difference. And he actually says, he says that his teacher, he said exactly actually that his teacher did not intend bare attention to be a translation of sati. His teacher used the word mindfulness for that term. But he coined the term to highlight the initial stage in the practice of satipatthana, which is the 4 establishments of mindfulness. And I think that pragmatically, a lot of teachers feel like this is like a stepping stone tool, but it's actually not the practice per se. And then George Dreyfus, he doesn't use the word bare attention in his article, but he talks about present-centered, non-judgmental awareness. which is the term that's used by John Kabat-Zinn and many others in the what I would call secular mindfulness. And these are very powerful tools. Both bare attention, it can be a very powerful tool, as does present-centered, non-judgmental awareness. But he also rejects that term in the Buddhist context. And what I would say is, the thing is when we read statements like what Bhikkhu Analayo said, like, all it takes is to remain aware in the present moment of the changing process of feelings as it is without reacting, that we should not kind of confuse or conflate awareness in the present moment with bare attention. Because if you think about it, there's a lot of things going on in the present moment. We have a lot of mental factors that are always there, for example. And also Thich Nhat Hanh, who talks a lot about present moment, right? I mean, that's really common for him. But he also, his main practices are the 4 establishments of mindfulness and the mindfulness of breathing. That's clear to me because I've read a lot of his work, and he was one of the first persons I ever read when I got interested in Buddhism, him and his holiness are the reasons I became a Buddhist. And so I've read his books for decades now, and then I got really interested in this topic, and he does use, I remember I searched for bare attention. I did find it in one of his books, but in general, when you read his stuff, like any other Buddhist, mindfulness is in a context of I would say, the Buddhist worldview in a way. But let's see what the Buddha said. So it's one thing I want to say is it's clear that Bhikkhu Bodhi, representing the Theravada tradition, and Thich Nhat Hanh, representing a Chinese Buddhist tradition. In Vietnam, they kind of have a mix of Mahayana and Theravada, actually. And so does his. He's very influenced by both. And then George Dreyfus, who's in the Tibetan tradition, right? To me, the way they address this topic is very similar. What's different is their philosophical underpinnings, and then the way some of the practices might play out. But when you actually look at what you're doing and how they describe these meditations, I don't see a lot of difference myself. But let's read what the Buddha said in one of the suttas. And this kind of, I think, illustrates kind of the point of this talk. He actually was talking about the 5 aggregates, and he went through each one separately: form, feeling, discrimination. In this context, I would say volitional factors and consciousness. So I'm just going to talk about the one on feeling, because that's what we're focusing on here today. And I think this explains the experience of what this meditation can be like. And the Buddha said, "A foolish, unlearned worldling does not understand as it really is the arising of feeling, the cessation of feeling, the gratification in feeling, the danger in feeling, and the escape from feeling." Because of not understanding as it really is, the foolish, unlearned worldling craves with delight for feeling, declaring feeling to be the self and to belong to the self, clinging and taking hold of it. If feeling is ruined, if it becomes otherwise, the foolish, unlearned worldling's mind and consciousness will follow it in turn, giving rise to vexation and pain. Vexation and pain having arisen, the foolish, unlearned worldling is frightened, obstructed, worried, distressed, and passionately bound. So that's the description of what happens with these 5 aggregates, but in particular here we're talking about feeling, although you could take any of them. If you just follow it in turn, it will lead to some kind of dukkha, essentially, and then and you stay with it, and you get fear, or you get other things that go on for you, stress, worried, distressed, obstructed, passionately bound. And so here the problem is that gratification that we do have through feeling comes with a danger. And the danger is based on the simple fact that everything changes. Like Lama Yeshe told Venerable Chodron, come, come, go, go. That's how it is with things. come, come, go, go. We have these things and they change. And unfortunately, a lot of times when they change, things that are pleasant don't usually, oftentimes they change to something that's less pleasant, right? So that's a drag if you're tied into it, if you're just clinging to that. So to the extent that you are clinging to any of the five aggregates, feeling, or any of the others, to the gratification that they might offer, to that extent you'll be upset and suffer when they change and become otherwise, which they do by their very nature. So that's the difference of bare attention, where you don't have any of this understanding, like what he said at the beginning, approaching with mindful understanding the experience of feelings. That's a very different thing than non-judgmental awareness or bare attention, where you're just like, like a camera lens or something. So then what the Buddha said, the reverse of this is like, a learned, noble disciple understands that it is as it is, the arising of feeling, the cessation of feeling, the gratification in feeling, which does exist, the danger in feeling, and the escape from feeling. And having understood as it is, the learned, noble disciple does not give rise to craving with delight. So they don't get like hooked, like the noose in your nose that's the feeling is pulling you around. And so they don't get craving with, that comes up in this grasping, and they also don't see feeling to be the self or to belong to the self. So they don't identify with these things so much, like, this is how I am, unpleasant. That's how I am. I'm either pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. That's how I am. So that's identifying with the feeling, right? So having understood as it really is, Buddha said that if the feeling changes, if it becomes otherwise, the learned noble disciple's mind does not follow it in turn, giving rise to vexation and pain. The mind, having not followed in turn and giving rise, so it now hasn't given rise to vexation and pain, the learned noble disciples does not get frightened, obstructed, worried, distressed, and passionately bound, because they haven't gotten hooked, because they know, they see it, feelings for what they are, transitory. And so they don't put expectations in them that they can't deliver on. So we see the gratification, but you also see the danger. And so once you prove that to yourself a number of times, then you're not hooked in by it. So that's, I think, what's possible for us to do this on a kind of like this doesn't seem to me like that hard for any of us in this room to accomplish, I would say, be able to see some of that. So maybe we do that and try to continue to develop this factor of mindfulness, which is so important in all of our spiritual paths, so that we can develop the wisdom we need to become awakened to benefit beings.
In that book that you read about mindfulness and its
diverse perspectives, right?
Yeah. Did it ever talk about how right mindfulness is what the Buddha was talking about? There's different kinds of mindfulnesses out there, but what he meant by mindfulness is that description is contained within the Eightfold Noble Path of right mindfulness.
I didn't read all of those chapters. I only read 2 chapters of that book. It's got many chapters by really a lot of different people, so I can't tell you what all is in that book. But in the 2 that I read, they're very complicated, long articles. I gave them both to you, actually. And you could look and see. I don't remember if that's in there. It might be, but it might not. I don't remember. I remember clearly that a lot of this was, I think the push in this book was in those 2 chapters anyway, was to try to clarify what is a very commonly used term right now, present-centered, non-judgmental awareness, which is a really wonderful thing to use. We're not saying that's not a good thing, but it's kind of letting people know with a lot of clarity what is secular mindfulness and what is Buddhist mindfulness. They come in different contexts and what they lead to, and there's areas of overlap. There's probably 4 possibilities between the 2. in terms of their content. So there's areas of overlap. So that's what at least those two chapters seem to be looking at primarily with a lot of detail.